Okay.
I'm Nicole, and today we are talking about part 3 of the book White Privilege. It's Whiteness, the Power of Privilege. So first thing we're going to talk about is, so you just found out that someone had a baby. What's the first question that you typically ask?
Is it a boy or a girl?
Exactly. And they were talking, the reason that they believe this is, and this was actually Marilyn Fry who kind of brought this to attention, we are a society that really just needs to categorize things. We are a very gendered and raced society because we have to ask this is it a boy or a girl question in order to be able to relate somehow. Because without knowing the gender of this child, for some reason, we can't connect in relation and be able to just talk openly about it. And it's the same even with adults. So I think a lot of us have had that experience where we see a random person and you kind of aren't really sure if it's a male or a female. So then for some reason in your head, you're just fixated on the fact that you don't know. And even though that person's not doing anything to you, they don't have anything to do with you, you get fixated on it because you have this necessity to categorize people and you don't have the ability to do so. And as far as race, they use the example in the book of there was a teacher named Mr. Rodriguez, and for some reason, people's minds, because of the categorizing, it's not just in relation, but once you categorize people, there are so many things, whether it's stereotypes or all of that, that get put in with that category. Mm-hmm. So even though the professor's name was Mr. Rodriguez, people were calling him Hernandez, Martinez, all of these things because they couldn't just individualize him.
Now, when you look at somebody's arm, you can't really tell anything about them except one thing: the color of their skin. Based off of that fact alone, you may stereotype that person, or you could make judgments about what that person's quality of life is, and there's a good chance you might be correct. Take going through airport security. If you look at this white arm right here, you might assume they probably got through security about maybe an hour, 30 minutes, depending on how busy the airport was, the size of it. Now, if you look at this slightly brown arm or this brown arm, they probably took a few hours, a couple, because they're more likely to get stopped for additional screening at the airport security just because their pigment of the skin is a little darker, because they're not white, especially when going to an airport in the United States. Darker skinned people, such as black people, also more likely to get stopped at airport security and taken in. And you don't know anything else about this person. This person could be a child, perhaps. But all you know is the color of their skin. And that alone, you can just assume that their life might just be a little more difficult just because of a standard stereotype based on the pigment of their skin. And you might think, what does this have to do with privilege? Well, as a white person, I have the privilege to go through airport security faster. Just because, as a white female, I don't look like a threat. I have nothing threatening about me. And say you have a slightly darker child. That child, maybe Iranian, Indian, doesn't really matter. It's just the stereotype going along with that child. If that child, perhaps maybe they're traveling with their school trip. They go to a private school maybe. Their family's richer. So they're with a school trip that can afford to go overseas or to Canada, and they're taking a plane. That child may be stopped by airport security because they think, even though it's a child, their skin's darker, the chance that they're a terrorist is higher. And that's not the child's fault. That's society's fault. That's your preconceived notions that you were taught yourself. And that's a privilege that they do not have. They don't have the privilege to be trusted just because they're a child. Peggy McIntosh, she goes from chapter 3 in this section of part 3, and she lists out some privileges that she has as a white individual. She lists just basic everyday things. She talks about the chances are that she's pretty assured that she won't be followed or harassed in a store. If I walk into a grocery store, the chances that a store manager is going to follow me around suspecting that I'm going to steal something are extremely low. But the chances that if I was black, the chances that I'll be followed around in the store, much higher. And this isn't just something that like one or two people experience. This is something that is experienced society-wise from town to town, from any place. It's a common misconception and it's a common privilege that we overlook. I never think about if I should look like I'm being suspicious. I never second guess what I'm wearing or where I'm going. I never think about if people are going to look at me suspiciously. It's never an issue that I have to be concerned about. From there, she also points out some other things. I never have to worry about if I speak in a public room, such as this, if people are going to think that what I'm saying is maybe ignorant or incorrect. Since I go to a predominantly white university, a powerful university, when I speak in front of a crowd, they're going to expect I know what I'm talking about. They're not going to think that I'm just coasting through because I didn't work for where I am.
Yeah, or another big point that was made is that, say, us as white females, we're challenging a situation or creating an argument based on something that we don't agree with. It's not being questioned that we're talking from the perspective of our entire racial group. We're being seen as individuals and not as our race. So something that is touched on in the book is that these categories that we get put in, they're a lot more complex than you would think that they are. So say at the top is your race. So say you are white. So it gets broken down farther than that. Well, are you male or are you female? Because then you may be in what is seen as the majority race, so white, but you're female, so suddenly you're a little less off than you would have been. But so after that, are you heterosexual or are you homosexual? Because that depicts a lot of it too. So depending on all of these different subcategories, you're looked at very differently, but that racial piece is always what's going to be on top, because between race and gender, that is your outward, what people see immediately. Those are the categories that you get put in right away. Heterosexual or homosexual, that piece, typically you can't just see it right off the bat. You have to kind of watch and look at a person and get to know them a little bit more to be able to see those types of things. And I was in a training one time about culture and kind of getting to see people on different layers, and we did this activity one time and it kind of hit you a little bit because you kind of got to see the different privileges that people do or don't have. So we were a group that was really mixed. We had black males and females, we had white males and females, all kinds of different people of colors, ages, backgrounds. And what it was is there were different colored beads on plates, and each color stood for a different type of privilege, whether it was religious, gender, racial, any of these different things. And kind of how the privileges are listed out in chapter 3, there were these lists of privileges, and every time that you had one that you agreed that you fit into, you would put it on this string. So then by the end, whether you were male, female, black, white, you saw how different those privileges were, even just within the group such as us. You see how different it really is, which you don't see that just from seeing each other every day.
Now when you look at this photo, you see two men, it looks like they're hailing a taxi. Now just from this photo alone, who do you think is going to get the taxi first? Anyone want to take a guess? Come on, it's an easy question. Who do you think will get a taxi first?
The white man.
The white man?
Yeah.
Why do you think that? You can say anything, it doesn't matter.
Because they're gonna be afraid of the black man, like he will not pay or something like that. But the white man is safe, always safe.
Oh, I see. All right, anybody else?
Personally, I would choose the black man because he looks friendlier.
That's true. That's personally. Well, in part 3, in one of the final chapters, they discuss a program that ABC put on out of a little experiment they did, where they took two men of the same social standing, basically completely the same education, same backgrounds. The only difference between them was the color of their skin. One was white and one was black. And they set them up to live in Chicago for a month or a few weeks. And while they were doing this, they set up hidden cameras and they just followed the men to see like if anyone would treat them differently. For the most part, it was fine, it was safe. But then they started to distinctly see like differences. When they tried to get apartments, the white man was shown an apartment immediately, while the black one was sold in that same apartment building that they had no open. They had no rentals available for them. When they tried to buy a car, they both asked to see the same car at different times. The white man was given a much cheaper price than the black man. The black man was charged 2 times higher than what it was listed as the car price. And finally, at the very end, why we ask about a cab, is that as they're pulling away and they're like taking the camera away and they're starting to close out the program, they show both men trying to hail a taxi. The black man in front and the white man farther down the street. And as they videotape this, a cab drives past the black man and stops in front of the white man, and the white man gets into the cab and they close out. And it shows just a woman, a white female, who's giving the newscast, and she's like, we'll just be motoring off now too. She's smiling, she doesn't even comment on the final act of privilege and small amount of like racism that was shown in that final scene. And that's her privilege as well. As a white female in the newscast, she wouldn't think, or she thinks maybe she shouldn't mention just this small act. She doesn't comment on it, she doesn't say anything about it, and that's her privilege to do so, because as a white woman, she wouldn't have to experience what that man just did. And so it doesn't affect her. She wasn't the one that drove past him. She wasn't the one that didn't get picked up from the cab. And because of that, she was able to keep silent.
So what comes to mind, what are some of the key things that you think about when someone says white supremacy? Like, what are some key images that pop into your head?
Think of the KKK.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. You think of this kind of stuff, the Confederate flag, the KKK, people protesting about any people of color, not even just Black Americans, but anyone of color. But the thing that a lot of people don't think about is that white supremacy, it's not only this. It's so many other little things that you don't think about in everyday society. So something that's listed is that net worth. White Americans gain a substantially higher amount of net worth than Black Americans do.
Yeah, in this photo, it's an older photo, probably before segregation was abolished, so obviously these classrooms are segregated. But you can already see a large difference. Not only are they segregated by color, but the white children each have an individual desk. They have a nice, spacious classroom, there's much fewer of them. But with the black children, they don't have desks. They're crammed together in this small room with less supplies. And you think now that this has to change, that this must be different. But if you look at classrooms now, this doesn't change at all. If you go to an inner city school, children are packed into tiny classrooms. They don't have nice supplies. They don't have nice clothes. White children are 2 times more likely to be in smaller class sizes, to have individual attention, to get the supplies that they need, the help that they need. Also, just another example of schools, likely if schools have an honors program, white children are more likely to put into the honors program while black children are overlooked. And it's not because of their educational backgrounds or their grades, it's because of their skin color. And nobody ever speaks out about it. Nobody ever says anything because as a white individual, it's not your child being looked over. Your child is in the honors program, your child is taken care of. If you're someone of color, you might speak out about it, but it's you against so many others. You're already oppressed. You already don't have any of these privileges. No one's gonna listen to your voice. And they go on and they list other things. They talk about some age gaps that we might have to like overcome in many years. For every dollar a white person makes, an African American makes 57 cents. And that was in 1968. Now for every dollar a white person makes, an African American makes 58 cents. And that was in 2001. At this current rate, it'll take 581 years for the African American to make the same amount of money that a white man would make. 581 years after the abolishment of slavery, after the end of segregation, after we've passed all of these rights to try to equalize pay, and nobody is speaking out against this small thing, at least nobody that's white.
Even home ownership was a big one. It said that since 1970, white home ownership has raised from 65% to 75%, whereas black home ownership has only risen from 42% to 48%. And they said that it'll take 55 generations or 1,664 years in order to decrease that gap to make them similar. That was a really outstanding number to us.
Now we show this photo because in one of the final chapters of this section, a story is being told by a black man who's of a higher wage. He and his wife are highly educated. They both have really well-paying jobs. They're at the top end of society, economically wise, money-wise. And they thought because they had so much money and they had such great educations and they raised their children the exact right way that they'd be able to protect their children from racism, from people like speaking badly of them. They sent their children to private schools, bought them everything they need, made sure they were perfectly educated. But he comes to find out that even though he's done all this stuff to help his children and give them a better life, that they still face these ostracization from other people in society. He finds out he sends his son on a summer trip, and his son calls him in tears. He was called out on the street as he was just walking down from the campus. He said that two men came up to him in a car, and they talked bad about him. They asked, why are you here? Well, aren't you a little far south to be around? And he called him in tears, and at that moment he was so afraid for his son because he had to experience that growing up. And that is why he worked so hard to get to where he was to protect his child. But he found that even with money and knowledge and education, he could not get past the barrier between colors. This color barrier that we have standing before us. And so then he goes on to share a list that he provided, that he used to raise his children, rules that he taught them. And I want to share some of the rules that he had that as a white individual, I'd never even had to consider. But if I were to be black, it's something maybe I would teach my own children. They say, never run while in view of a police officer or a security person, unless it is apparent that you are jogging for exercise. Because a cynical observer might think you are fleeing a crime or about to assault somebody. So don't run. As a child, I was running all around stores. My mother would always say, stay by my side, don't run away. She wasn't afraid someone was going to think I was stealing something. She was afraid that maybe someone would try to take me. They're not afraid that someone's going to try to steal their child. They're afraid their child is going to be accused of a crime or maybe harassed or hurt by somebody because they thought they were committing a crime.
And I have to say something about that. And we're seeing that. White people calling up because a black person doing something completely normal. So what they're saying is not this really outlandish thing, but something we see in the news. Go ahead.
Yeah. Well, and another example was telling your child, don't walk around the neighborhood, even their neighborhood, at night. And never hold anything that looks metallic, that even if it's just a large flashlight, because it can be looked at as a weapon, and you could be shot because they think that you're holding a gun. And this was just very humbling to read because as a white individual, growing up, my parents never had to talk with me about something like this. And it's something that I think this is a very large privilege that we have, that we don't have to have these conversations because society doesn't look at us in these ways. And so it's almost humbling to realize that there are so many people in the United States and throughout the world that have to deal with so many more of these problems than we ever do.
So how do we change how things are? Well, as someone of color, your automatic thing would be to march. You would always see at rallies, they're all black. You had, in the past, we had the KKK, so to beat up the KKK, we had the Black Panthers. A group of black, strong individuals that came together to fight against oppression. They raised their voices because they wanted to be heard. They wanted to change how things were. And they've been doing this for years. Since the time of slavery, black people have been raising their voices to change the way things are. And they've made changes. They've made great strides forward. But it seems recently that these changes have come to a halt, that we're regressing back to the way we were, and that their voice that they've been like raising so hard hasn't been enough. And so now, instead of just challenging oppression, we need to move forward. As white people, we need to raise our own voices. We need to challenge our privilege. We need to question why we, as individuals, have all of these rights that are denied to other people. I need to figure out why I, as a mother, won't have to one day ask my child and tell them, make sure your bag is completely zipped when you walk into the store, and always keep a receipt in hand when you leave a store, because I know my child isn't going to stop by a cashier when they exit the store saying, wait, I think you took something. I know my child is going to buy something from a store and they can walk out, and that'll be perfectly fine. I will never have to worry about it. I need to question why it's an issue if my child, if I adopted or married someone of another race, another color, a black man, and we had a mixed baby, a black baby, why I'd have to then become knowledgeable about this. I'd have to then talk to my child, honey, I need you to be able to make sure you keep your receipts. Because someone stops you, I want you to be able to prove that you paid for all of your things. I want to know why my baby, who maybe not white like me, has to go through this. I want to be able to know, I want to be able to ask people, why are you doing this to my child but not that child? Why is this a difference? Why are we different? I need to be able to challenge the privilege that I have to protect future generations, to protect other people, to protect my friends.
Yeah, and this is something that we've seen even in the videos that we've watched in class, and they've talked about people of color have been facing this battle for so long, and there are certain populations that they're just not listening, because whether it's they don't care, they just believe differently. The way to get through to a lot of these people is for white Americans to challenge your privilege, or even whether it's not even race, but it's sexuality. So heterosexual people challenging to help homosexuals and people of the LGBTQ community. Because especially race, one of the easiest ways to get to, say, some of your higher up white males, the Donald Trumps, the people that support him, is from another white citizen. Because for some reason, in that categorization and that grouping, it's just easier to connect with them for some reason, because they're more likely to listen to a white person than a person of color, unfortunately, as it is. And so in order to move forward and really make change, it's so important to challenge that privilege that you have. That's it.
All right, do we have any questions? Does anybody have anything they want to say? You don't have to say a question, you can share your opinion.
Okay, I agree with most of what you said. I want to come in on the school
Sure.
thing, because I am at an inner city Canton school, and they have huge classrooms there, and they all each have individual whiteboard tables, and it's nicer materials than I've ever actually seen anywhere else. So I just kind of want to know, like, how far into research did you go into that? Like, was it more like in past, or was it like in schools around the United States? And it might not have even been like a ton of research.
It wasn't a ton of research on it. We went into some of like the past things and some of the strides that we're making now. I'm not saying that every school has an issue, but it is an issue that is like societal wise. Not every school is going to be this. A lot of schools have made strides to move forward. A lot of people have been very open. They've been trying to fix these things, and that's wonderful, but it's not a countrywide change that's been made. It's a school here and a school there. And I understand what you're saying, but like, yeah, not everything's like this. We're not saying like every white person is bad and they're going to be starting questioning children. We're not saying every cashier is going to stop every little boy or every like black individual. But it's still an issue, and there's still too many people that don't realize that it's an issue.
The other thing you want to look at is the amount of money that's spent per child. And it varies from state to state, but generally there's more money spent per white person than it is per black child. You also want to look at the private schools and enrollment of private schools. And when you talk about the honors program, there's a great example. Honors program has fewer blacks than whites. But yet, when you look at the intelligence, it goes over everybody. So what's up with that? So one way to look at these things is to look at the ratio of the amount of money spent on black children, and then look at the program honors programs.
Great point. Anybody?